Welcome to episode 2 of the Welcome to the USA Personal Finance Edition. My name is Hui-chin. I'm a certified financial planner and owner of Pavlov Financial Planning. I also blog on Money Matters for Globetrotters.com. And you will see all of these series of video will be on my blog. And so today we're going to talk about credit. It will actually be the first episode among the first 5 where we're talking about some of the basics. For those of you who are moving to the US for the first time, most likely with your spouse. You might be wondering why we're talking about credit. First, you might be coming from a country or culture where you just do not borrow money, or borrowing money is a very personal affair only with family and friends. So you will see that in the US, credit history is actually very important for you to function in a society. It's not just for borrowing money, it's actually for verifying your identity and sort of allowing other people to provide you with services before you start paying or paying in full. So let's start by defining credit. It's basically what I just said. It's getting the benefit before you pay. So if you think about signing up for cell phone services, and you only pay after the month ends. So you may accumulate the cost because you've made different amount of phone calls, or like utilities like electricity. They only charge you after knowing how much you spent. So in this instance, it's actually considered a type of credit because they don't know whether you're going to pay or not before they give you this line. So the next question is, how is this credit history used? So I'm going to share with you a simple chart of how credit history is used. All right, so what is credit history? So credit history is basically, for example, how much you borrow or how much you pay, and how long that has been going on. So for example, one of the potential credit history you might have is like credit card. So the credit history will include how big your credit balance could be. The credit card company might give you $5,000 maximum. You cannot spend more than $5,000. And another part of history would be how long have you had this $5,000 balance, or not balance, maximum balance you could have. And it could be only for a couple months, or it could be 10 years. And another part of history could be payment history, which is the most important part, is whether you have paid on time or not. And this is basically what all the service providers and vendors care about the most, is whether you have been paying on time consistently in the past, so they feel more comfortable extending credit to you, especially if you're talking about a credit line as big as like a mortgage. So, and here's the interesting part, and you may hear a lot about credit score, and you may not have thought a lot about credit report. So those two things both come from credit history, which basically require company, or in this case in the US, there's 3 credit bureaus, and they're all private companies, to collect your personal payment history data in the past. So you may be wondering, so how do they do that? Well, a system has been set up so that, for example, your credit card companies or banks, mortgage company, they will send data to these bureaus, and there are some data exchange agreements, and the bureau will collect all this data. And the credit history, or the data, will be fit into 2 different things. So first is credit report. So credit report is very clear. It's just basically breaking down all the history potential data that I just talked about. So if you have ever pulled your credit report before from the 3 bureaus, you will see, okay, maybe the first one is, this is your credit card. And the second one will be, this is your mortgage, and it will show whether you've been paying on time or not for the past however long you've had that credit line. So this is very helpful in addition to assess whether you're credit worthy or not. It's very helpful for identity verification. For example, right now, if you want to get your Social Security report directly online, or maybe you haven't seen it, maybe your spouse has. So a Social Security report online is basically detailing your payment, your work history, and how much you've been paid before, and how much Social Security payment you may be eligible in the future. So in order to make sure that it's not just a random person for some reason gotten your Social Security number and being able to get all of your proprietary private information, Social Security Administration contract with other technological company and the credit bureau to institute, before you can get your credit report, get your Social Security report, you need to answer a series of questions. And if you have gone through that, you might be wondering, oh, how do they know to ask whether, I've ever had a mortgage on, 123 Main Street? Well, the reason is that based on the initial information you provided in order to get your Social Security report, they send this data back into the credit bureau and they pull your credit report information to make sure that you can answer those questions as well to verify your identity. So that's a pretty long explanation of how that works. But even that's a good reason to have credit history, even if you don't need credit. Like if you are independently wealthy, or you already have your house paid off, everything paid off, you have no need to borrow money, having a credit history is still important in order for you to function and to get information quickly online and things like that. And the other part is traditionally what we think about credit score. Credit score is a quick way for some of the vendors or a service provider to see whether you're credit worthy. For example, if you go to get a phone line that's not prepaid, it's a postpaid or electricity company to set up a utility line under your name, most likely they're going to pull your credit report and credit score just to make sure it's showing that you have been paying on time in the past, so they feel more comfortable on giving you that credit. So, and the credit score or the credit worthiness is most important is when the credit is bigger or when the credit is non-secured. So like in the credit is bigger part, it's like mortgage and auto loan and private student loans, where the amount of credit you're getting, that you're borrowing, is huge. So they really want to see that you have better credit score. Or the other part is when the loan is not secured, for example, like student loans or credit card. So there's nothing they can take back if you don't pay them. For example, if you get a mortgage, technically if you don't pay, they can say, well, now I can take over your house because you didn't pay the money you borrowed from me. So I'm taking the house or the equity in the house in order to compensate. And the same thing applies to auto loans. So there is a asset behind the credit that you get. So the opposite of that is unsecured, meaning there is no asset to back it up. So that's why if you're getting a credit card, having a good credit score or an acceptable credit score is usually important. The other part, having a good credit score or being credit worthy, is that you might get better interest rate. So, and that's very important when you're borrowing to buy a house and things like that. If you get a lower interest rate over a 30-year period of time, you pay a lot less interest. So this is sort of like an overview of why credit history is very important. So while the next part would be, while you're new to the US, you'll have no credit history. A common question people ask is, well, I have credit history in my home country, can I bring it over? Or can I just print out a report to show somebody? Generally, no. Like nobody's going to accept it. It's possible, like if you're trying to get a small credit card with a small balance, if you go to a bank in person and say, I'm from this country, this is our country's credit report, and this is my payment history. Would you be willing to do that for me? It's possible in a personal situation, they might be, but usually banks or larger financial institutions that their standard system or process in order to extend credit, it's very unlikely they're going to jump outside of that process. So here, now we're going to talk about what else you can do. So, okay, before we talk about building credit history, I also want to talk about 3 things. First of all, if you don't know for sure if you have credit history, you can always check for free. So the federal law guarantee every US person to be able to obtain your credit report for free every year. So the credit bureaus will not be able to charge you in order to see your credit history. So the same cannot be said for a credit score. So credit score is a proprietary product that the credit bureau will want to sell it to you. And sometimes they can get it for free, from a credit card company. They may offer it to you for free, but it's not necessarily important for you to know your credit score at all times. And I'll tell you a little bit why later. But the important thing is checking first to see whether you have credit reports. And basically, as long as you have a US address, like if you're already in the US, or you already have gotten some kind of driver's license, state ID from your marriage, so you have basically an address, and you have a social security number. You can try to get online to see whether you can pull a credit report. And if you have never had your name associated with any credit cards, any mortgage, anything related, it's most likely you will go through the process, and they will say, the credit bureau will come up with a message saying, sorry, you cannot find your credit report, please contact us. But this is actually a good thing, because that means nobody has basically taken your identity and open up credit cards in your name without you knowing about it. So that is why first, before you start thinking about, how do I build credit, check to make sure your credit is clean. So if you know for sure that you've never had any credit associated with your name in the US, you should still go through that process to make sure your credit is clean under your social security number. And the second thing, I talked about why score may not be important. One of the main reason is that when you're going to get credit, especially like a mortgage or auto loan, although they initially, when they quote you the interest rate or the terms, they might use the credit score you're able to provide. Like if your credit card company provide you this free access to credit score, you may think, I have credit score of 750. I should be able to get a really good rate. What happened is that those mortgage companies or auto loan companies or student loan companies, they actually have their own proprietary system to calculate their own score based on the credit data, the credit history. So the score they are using eventually to give you the final rates is not the same as the one that you can see. So the most important thing is to know you have good credit history. So it's not as important to know exactly how high your credit score is, whether it's 800 or 850. Usually when you have good credit history, it's good enough. So what is a good credit history, you might ask? The good credit history usually means that you have never not paid on time. So usually if you have that's step number 1. Step number 2 is that they want to see more than just one credit line. And a lot of times they want to see at least 3 credit lines in order for they to have a better idea of your payment history. So that's another thing you can do is build up more. If you only have one credit card, get another one, but make sure you pay it off, of course. Or right now only your spouse's name is on some of the things you're paying together, you might want to consider getting on those loans. But overall, the main criteria to calculate high credit score is payment history, you have enough credit lines, and also the utilization. So are you maxing out your credit all the time, especially if it's revolving? Like if you have 3,000 maximum balance you can keep, are you always at 3,000 and you're just paying off a little bit every month? Or are you basically always paying down to zero every month? So this will also sort of change the calculation of whether they think you're creditworthy or not. Of course, the company that's issuing credit like to see that you're able to afford getting the credit that they're issuing to you. So the last thing of the things that you might want to do, the first two I'll reiterate, is check your credit report first, and second, see what you may need to add to your credit report, and do you need to get more credit line or build other credit history, but you don't necessarily have to care about the score. So the report is important. And the third thing related to report is make sure you protect against fraud. So I mentioned a little bit first, and the first point is that people, the reason why I ask you to check report first is that I want to make sure your credit history is clean. If you have never gotten any credit, make sure nobody has used your social security to get a credit card or something like that. So people might use your identity to commit fraud. So in order to prevent that, now there's a federal law allowing people to freeze credit report for free as well. So in the past, you actually have to pay to freeze and unfreeze your credit report, and now it's free. So what you can do is go to the 3 credit bureaus, and which are Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. So you don't need to remember those 3. So when you check your credit report, you will see those 3 companies pop up. So, and you can also basically Google those 3 companies and Google security freeze credit report, and it will pop up at the right web address for you to freeze or to basically manage your credit report. So now before it's actually pretty complicated. Now you can actually freeze and unfreeze fairly easily since it's no cost. You can just basically log in. And when there's a few years of time where you don't need credit, let's say you already have 3 credit lines and they're all going well, and now you're overseas, eventually you might go back. So right now, a good thing to do might be to freeze it so make sure that nobody can commit fraud with your identity. But once maybe in 2-3 years, you might be buying a house back in the US, and then you can actually go online and unfreeze your credit report before the lenders trying to give you quotes and to allow you to get a mortgage. All right. So the last thing I want to cover today is basically, let's say you're in the situation where you are really struggling from scratch. There's no US credit history at all. What are some of the few things that you can try? And I mentioned a little bit before already, but here are a few things that you might want to try. So first, which a lot of people have done, is basically get on your spouse's credit card, a US credit card. And because credit cards are one of those things that you cannot jointly own, it's most likely you will be an authorized user of your spouse's credit card. So this is the easiest thing to do, but it doesn't always show up on your credit report or increase your credit calculation or credit score calculation. So for personally, I'm an authorized user on my husband's credit card, and that particular card does show up on my credit report. So I want to make sure that both, together, we're paying that card. So, but because you're authorized user only, it might not count as good for you when we're talking about, mortgage, getting a mortgage and things like that. So the second thing you may consider doing is getting a secured credit card. So secure credit card is basically most of the time a credit card with a small maximum balance that you can carry, a small credit line, and it's secured by a deposit with the bank. So let's say, just giving an example, that to go to a major bank like Chase or Bank of America, and you say, well, I'm willing to deposit $1,000 with your institution. I will not in your checking account, and I will not take it back out. Would you give me a $500 credit line? So basically, you can only spend maximum $500, but because you have $1,000 with them, it's considered secure instead of unsecured. So this is a good way to start building a small credit history. So this is actually the card that I had when I started in the US as a student. So I have an account at that time with PNC, and I just asked for a $500 credit card after I opened a checking account for, I think, probably 5-6 months. So I got the $500 credit card, but, I can only use it for, occasionally. It's not like I'm putting everything on credit card. But after a few months, they come back to me and say they're willing to increase the credit line to $2,000. So that's a way for you to build beginner's credit. So I don't really know which banks currently have it. And if you're curious which banks that's offering this, Google which bank is offering secure credit card, and you will see a lot of the personal finance website giving you good recommendation and reviews. So the next step, after you've got your secure credit card and maybe graduated to higher credit line, now you have one credit line on your credit card. Two things might happen. First is you might start getting actually credit card offers. But if you're currently overseas, you might not actually receive those offers. The second thing would be like you can actually start looking into what kind of credit cards that you're able to get that's unsecured. So it's not required that you get a checking account with that bank, but they're willing to give it to you when you only have one other credit card or one credit line on a report. And this will be the second step. You can start building an additional credit line on your report. So now you will have maybe one that's a secure credit card, and the other one is the unsecured with still a small balance. But the good thing is that this is also in your name only. So you're not trying to, you basically like the first option, like an authorized user, where you're basically connected to your spouse. So those are the 3 steps you can do without basically having a need for credit. Just remember, because a credit card is in the modern life, it's more like for convenience. So it's not, although some people do put extra expense on credit card when they cannot pay and they just pay it off over time. But here I'm just trying to give you a way to build credit for all the other benefits that we talked about at the very beginning of this episode. About allowing you to even like rent apartment and get post-pay utilities, and able to use online application to verify identity and things like that. So I'm not saying that you definitely need to borrow money when you get credit cards. So credit cards, you can also use it just for convenience. And in order for you to build good credit score, make sure you auto pay your credit card. And I want to repeat that, auto pay your credit card in full. Auto pay your credit card in full. Because a lot of people, when they get credit card, is that they forget that they need to pay the bill. And then they have a delinquency on their credit report, and that actually drives down their credit score. So the whole idea of building credit history is so that you have good credit history, not bad ones. So make sure that if you are going this route, make sure that you auto pay the credit card. And in order to make sure you can afford a credit card, you can always just start with very small charges. Like, for example, if your family, have some monthly recurring small charges like Netflix or magazine subscription or iTunes subscription, things like that, like just $3 a month, $5 a month, you can just put it on credit card, and that's the only charge. And you set up the auto payment on the same day every month to pay it in full. So it's automatically creating a good credit history for you. And the last possible way to further create another credit line and a good credit line is if your spouse is a responsible borrower, and right now he already have a mortgage or an auto loan or things that's related to the assets you own together, but only your spouse is borrowing because he's the only person who had U.S. credit history. You might consider refinance to add your name back onto it once you have better history. But there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, pros is you further add better credit history onto your credit file, so you may have even better credit score in the future. But the downside or the risky side is that obviously you're responsible for the same large payment like mortgage or car loan, and before you're personally not responsible for that. So it really depends on whether you feel comfortable on getting on that with your spouse at this point. So I hope that's a good overview of a lot of the things you can do regarding your credit in the US. So I'm going to share with you the last to summarize. Credit history is the thing that's important. It manifests itself in the credit report and credit score, and it can be used to assess your creditworthiness and verify your identity. But the most important thing is check your credit report now, and if you don't have a credit history at all, try to put it up. All right, so if you want to learn more or download a checklist of the things that I talked about, I intentionally did not put on those individual things that I talked about in words, because I don't want you to focus on those words. I want you to also listen and understand other people maybe have different ways of memorizing or understanding information. So I also created a checklist detailing the things I told you that you should be doing in a separate file, where you can go to this web address to download once you give me your email address. So the web address is moneymattersforglobetrotters.com/welcome-USA. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and you're welcome to give me your ideas, thoughts, feedbacks as well on that web address that I just showed you. And I look forward to hear from you and share with you episode 3, which we're going to talk about employment. All right, take care. Have a good day.